So welcome everyone. This is awesome. We're delighted to have so many people registered on this call this evening. This type of turnout just kind of like warms your heart and showcases the true community that clinical education is. So first off, just thank you. Thank you. You guys are a rare breed of people that jump onto a session like this. I don't know, the week before CSM. Just thanks for coming. Thanks for being engaged in this listening session. So by no means is the listening session ours, that being the CE Commission. Rather, it's ours as the clinical education community for us to kind of define what we want to make this this evening, as well as listening sessions into the future. So secondly, it's been 3 months since the CE Commission was formed. And now I was going to say with our feet firmly planted on the ground, I think they're firmly planted in like mashed potatoes, maybe or like warm applesauce, one of the two. But we're ready to share what we've been up to and talk about the work that's kind of ahead of us. So bear with me as we kind of get going. So why the listening sessions? What are they? What are we doing here? What's going on? So I'd like to kind of just frame how this evening is going to roll out. And I think really just starting with the why helps orient me for sure. So I think of the consistent touch points that ACAPT or historically the NCC has had over the years with the clinical education community. I think of ACAPT town hall meetings. I think of potentially NCCE tackling an urgent issue, a lunchtime webinar or two as years have gone by. And I think of the NCCE business meeting at ELC, and those being just like tangible touch points across the year. The most powerful for me has always been the community that's met at the regional networking session at ELC. So for those that have attended before, they're electric. They're often focused on a singular topic or two. They have a pressing idea going on with clinical education. And that meeting is kind of morphed into a workshop of meaningful solutions.
Your daddy does pause.
We'll keep on going. So I think those meetings are just fantastic, and a lot of good work has come from that. Research, foundational work, and best practices for clinical education. So always we end those regional networking sessions on a high. And I don't know about you, but I often wish that there were just more people in the room, or the room was just plain old bigger, and we could take that excitement and that work that's being done and bring it down to all the little layers that exist within clinical education. And within that conversation, that's kind of how the ACAPT Roadshow or Regional Consortium Roadshow was born. So can we start taking some of that message to the regional consortia? And we've started to do that. So a small work group off of the NCC and now the CE Commission has tackled 2 roadshows. To date, we have 3 more additional roadshows of the 23 regional consortia that exist out there, and we have 3 on the schedule for this year. However, I think it was quickly apparent that we need more touch and more consistent touch within the members of the regional consortia and the clinical education community as a whole. Hence, now like the listening sessions. So our plan is really to sculpt these into the needs of the CE community, do them predictably, quarterly, and use momentum from ELC to kind of carry that engagement and resource sharing over the space of the year. Okay, so this evening, we're gonna do an intro. You're almost done with me, don't worry. And then we're going to be stepping into some breakout rooms. We're going to dedicate about 40 minutes for the breakout rooms. They'll be facilitated and led with one of the commissioners within the CE Commission. We use the registration link and those prompting questions to see what was those items that are on people's plates or on people's minds regarding clinical education. And we came up with kind of 5 themes for this evening that are going to guide the breakout session that you step into. You can kind of see them written there. We're going to have some prompting questions. Once we do that conversation, we'll come back as a big group. We'll have another 20 minutes or so to then discuss what each of those breakout rooms kind of had, what some of their takeaways were, so we can all hear the conversation in its entirety by the end of the evening. Appreciating the room is big. There's going to be a lot of people both in this main room as well as in the breakout sessions. Don't feel like your voice can't be heard. Use the chat feature. If your question or your thoughts aren't getting out there, place them into the chat. We are going to try to digest all of that information and save them afterwards and come up with what the best resource is to get that information back to the clinical education community, whether that be a frequently asked questions page, whether that be different snippets of ways to tackle some of the questions that are on your mind. So I want you to feel heard amidst this evening. So there's a lot of us. That is great. Let's keep it as positive as we possibly can. Again, use the chat features within the breakout rooms when we get there, and we'll do our best to capture it. We're also human, so we appreciate, we just had a frantic half hour before this call began of all the nuances, ins and outs of how this listening session is going to go. So we're simply an email away. Connect with us. What would you like? How would you like us to structure or restructure some of the information that we're both sharing and the ways in which we're trying to gather the information? On the bottom of all the slides today, you'll see the clinical education at acap.org. That is a direct email to the CE Commission if you don't know specifically who your liaison is or who you're trying to reach out to. Speaking of, this is the incredible people that make up the CE Commission. I couldn't be happier with our group. I think we're representative of so many different voices within the clinical education community already. And I'm excited for the past 3 months and excited for the work ahead. To do the introduction, I think helpful to orient to that picture that's in the upper left-hand corner, that being the map. Many of us have probably seen this before if we've gone to a ELC business meeting or such. This color-coded map is how ACAP regions are separated out. And to not reinvent the wheel, we tried to support the way in which that our commissioners can liaison to different regions as well as regional consortia, and kept it consistent to this map. So there's 9 regions, there's 9 commissioners. We've kind of positioned ourselves in such a way that we cover the same ACAP areas. What's shown on this, and it's teeny tiny print, but there's regional consortia, right, that exist within each of those 9 regions. And it's not as perfect as you wish it could be. There's some states that have an overlap or defining point, but feel confident that one of our commissioners serves as a liaison directly to one of your regional consortia. I tried to, on this slide, capture who those individuals are and the ACAP regions that they represent. So feel confident to reach out directly to that commissioner that represents you, and or again, directly to the CE Commission if you have any questions or information. I wouldn't be surprised if we're already starting to get some communication directly from the commissioners themselves. So just as a way of introduction, in the upper left-hand corner is Katie Myers. She is DCE at Duke University. She serves as the Vice Chair of Internal Affairs on the CE Commission. Her and Paul Smith, who is kind of bottom center on that screen, who is an SEC at the Community Regional Medical Center in Fresno, serve as the liaisons to the West, North, Central, and Mid-Atlantic regions. Center of your screen on the top is Arve Vitente. He is program chair at Lewis University. He and Kelly Myers, who's SCC at Upstate University Hospital, which is part of the New York SUNY system, cover the Northeast and the Great Lakes regions. Vice Chair of External Affairs, Jeanette Scardillo, DCE at University of Scranton. Her and Carla Huggins, DCE at Georgia State University, cover Western Mountain and the Pacific regions. Tara Parody, DCE at University of New England. Jennifer Logan, clinical instructor at University of Colorado Hospital, then cover West, South Central, and South Atlantic regions. And myself, Matt Calandrello, serve as chair of the CE Commission, and I'm covering New York, New Jersey's regions as well. So please use us. Hopefully you see our smiling faces there. We are resources for you. I want to spend just a couple of moments speaking about just some of the structure within ACAP and a little bit of structure within APTA. Every time I both speak to it as well as hear someone else speak of it, I feel like I take one more little nugget away in terms of understanding some of the structure and orientation to how these organizations run and exist. So many of us have seen this image. This was the reboot of the restructure within ACAP. This has been an ongoing process for about the past year and a half or so. So just to orient ourselves to this horseshoe and what makes up the ACAP structure itself, lower left-hand side, we see the board of directors within ACAP. Those are elected positions of representatives of member institutions. Talk about that a tiny bit more in a second. Then we see the ACAP staff. Exciting. From the time that I started to interact with ACAP, the ACAP staff literally has tripled. So I'm excited for the potential of engagement and work that can be done just based on pure staff and sizing. In the center, we'll see committees and commissions. That's where the CE Commission kind of lives or is housed. We see the Center of Excellence. That to me is an area where a lot of the data collection and data analysis is done. That's where the institutional profile survey is housed. So big data communication there. And then the new inset of the institutions, an Institute for Academic Advancement, Institute for Teaching and Learning, Institute for Community Engagement, Institute for Scholarly Inquiry. Each of these institutes have both a chair and a vice chair role, and this truly is where the work of the task forces are housed. We'll speak about task force in a second, but kind of remember that being the institutes. I'm embarrassed to say I made this graphic. It looks like a 3-year-old did it, but it helps my mind. So this helps with who's who, right? So if we look at the left-hand side of this image, this is the big piece of pie that is the APTA. We think of the APTA having those chapters and sections and academies. And if we think of the Academy of Education, that being a piece of the pie of the APTA, and underneath that is where CE Sig lives, right? And that whole column represents institutional representation. And many of us, if not all of us on this call, likely have our hat or our foot in that entity as well, both being an APTA member, an Academy member, and a member of CE Sig. So what's the difference, right? If we take to the right side of that, of the image itself, ACAP really represents institutions. And those institutions are academic members or academic institutions. Within ACAP exists the CE Commission, which we just kind of went over. And then kind of by default, we feel like we have this strong lifeline or strong tie to the regional consortia. The predecessor, the NCCE, was really born of this grassroots efforts from the regional consortia to what has become the NCC and now the CE Commission. So that truly is where I think institutionally we lie. And there's some communication points there, right? Ones we just mentioned, the listening sessions, the regional networking session, some of that outreach there. And I also put up there the ACAP regions. Keep your eyes and ears out for that as well. They will run town hall communications to ACAP regions. And we, as part of the clinical education community, should feel as a part and voice of that academic physical therapy conversation. So I encourage you to go to a town hall meeting should one arise. And I don't think any NCC or now CE Commission slide set can ever be done without presenting this image. I just love it. I think it really showcases the melting pot of communication that allows our world to thrive. So it's not a top-down, up-down hierarchy, but rather we want cross-bridging and communication across all levels. So from regional to local, from local, regional to national, and vice versa. If there's one takeaway we've noticed so far from the 2 road shows is oftentimes this horizontal communication or collaboration, especially from region to region, feels lacking, or people feel like they don't have a good tangible touch point for that. We're hoping the listening session can help bridge some of that networking gap. So what we have here is individuals that are representing regional consortia and their own institutions, and we're hoping that horizontal band of communication can improve. I'd mentioned task forces. There's a lot of them, right? And I took this snapshot from the ACAP website. So you can simply go to the ACAP website, find task forces, and be drawn to a page that looks very similar to this. I encourage you to, because there's a lot of information by simply clicking on one of the task forces. You can see what its charge is, the timeline associated to it, the members that are portions of it, and the work that's projected to be done. I'll draw attention, there's 3 task forces or entities that are coming to fruition upcoming. We've probably heard them at length, that being the Clinical Education Placement Capacity and Process Innovation Task Force, the Clinical Partner Engagement and Academic Physical Therapy Task Force. Both of those are likely to have recommendations done really, really soon. We're talking about within the next month or so. And as we start getting our charge from the CE Commission as to how to digest that information, we're going to be calling on our community to help us do that. So keep an eye out for sure. I'll also mention, if there's work for the CE Commission, it's helping shape what some of those future task forces look like and the topics that they're identifying work around. So I would encourage you to keep that in your mind. If there's a task force that you feel might need some attention that is clinical education leaning, or a clinical education voice on a future task force, make sure you're making yourself a part of that conversation. So we've got some work ahead of us for sure. We view our initial charges or focus for the Clinical Education Commission to really be a hub for resources and this bi-directional communication related to all things clinical education. If it's happening, we want to know about it, and if it's happening, we want to be able to share it. So we really want to serve ourselves as that hub. We're up for options and recommendations on how to make that a reality as we work forward. We're also kind of charged to build and foster, innovate this idea of a clinical education excellence framework. Much like the excellence framework that exists on the academic side, we bring best practices to clinical education. So we view this as a future project within the Data Advisory Committee and the CE Commission to try to come up with putting best practice into a framework design. And lastly, partnerships. We've been charged to recommend strategies to ACAP leadership to devise effective partnerships that involve clinical education, whether that be some of the partnership that we might discuss this evening about Exact within larger clinical institutions, and some of those voices that we're just not currently getting at the ACAP clinical education level. Just want to be on the forefront of that. This is where I start to shake my pom-poms. There's no longer an excuse that we can't get information or we're not getting information directly from ACAP. It literally couldn't be easier. So if there's any time to take out your phone, take a snapshot of this QR code. This brings you directly to the site to register with an ACAP. And kind of the question is always, who can register with ACAP? Like literally everyone. So registration to get onto the database of ACAP is different than member institution. So that yes, there's member institutions, there's 270 plus of them. They represent the academic institution. Anyone that falls within the purview of a relationship with that academic institution can become registered with ACAP and receive the newsletters, the timely education, the email blasts as well. So pose the next slide, because this truly is the who of it all. So I hope you see yourself in this list, so that being clinicians, SCCs, CIs, this being full-time faculty. If there's people that are engaged in the database, it tends to be program chairs and DCEs. I think we have to look up and down our hallways to make sure we're getting some of those other core faculty members getting the information directly from ACAP as well. And the one on the bottom, I just love to showcase students. Students can become registered with ACAP. So what a way to kind of start that conversation early on within their educational process. So if you're on that site and you click through and you selected which denotion kind of identified you the best, you'd be brought to this. And if you are associated, your faculty within an academic member institution, simply click that first drop-down menu, find the school, and that leads you towards the registration. If you're on the clinical side, if you work closely with 5 different academic institutions, pick the one you work the closest with and identify them on that drop-down, identify your denotion in the other, and that's your way to register. If you're associated to a PTA program or PTA clinical education site, same thing, you can enter that information on the other threshold there, and that gets you into the database as well. All right, I promised the group 20 minutes. I think we're pretty close to that. So where we're going from here, again, we're a large group. We're going to shift off into 5 different breakout sessions or 5 breakout rooms. We're going to do a singular session. They're going to tackle the topics that are listed there. So we're going to talk about program proliferation. There was some concern listed in some of the registration questions that there's just an increasing number of both programs and students. And there was concern around how do we maintain some of the quality of clinical education that's happening as that growth expands. That group is going to tackle that topic. Second one is just variation in the placement process. We know of current ones within Exact One that are going to be discussed, as well as just changes to that March 1st concept. So placement process is going to be the breakout room number 2. Number 3 is going to be discussing new program development and use of the regional consortia. So on numerous occasions, there's been some concern around new programs are developing in an area, and each regional consortia has differing processes for how they reach out to institutions, how they allow membership, whether someone's an accredited program or not. So that's what that group's going to discuss. Group number 4 is going to discuss the inpatient placement process. I think we need not say more. Group number 5 is going to be talking about meeting the student needs through accommodations. So same thing, a growing question around the impact to clinical education placements, clinical education sites and settings, as well as the impact to the student, the CI, and academic institutions when there's specialized needs within that student learning environment. So those are going to be the groups that we're going to break people off into. You will have a facilitator or 2 within the CE Commission in your group. They'll kind of take the conversation from there. Remember, it's a large group, so raise your hand if you have something that you want to share with the group to communicate. And then if your voice is not being heard, please place it in the chat, and we will digest that information afterwards. So I appreciate it. I'm going to stop my screen, and we'll go off into some rooms. Welcome back, everyone. We did it. We did it. We successfully went to breakout rooms and came back. I love it. Our conversation was fantastic. I appreciate we're coming up towards that 8:30 timeframe. My hope for the last few moments was going to be to reach out to each of the groups and the facilitator within that group, just to give the broader attendance a bit of the conversation that you guys had, what some takeaways were, and perhaps identify some work that we can do. So in those minutes, maybe I can pass it to group 1.
Arby, are you ready?
Yeah, I think that's us. Okay, so in our group, it's about program proliferation. So, so some of the strategies that were mentioned, of course, the 2-to-1 strategy. There are some discussion about burnout for not only for clinical instructors but also for DCEs. There are some ideas about providing housing stipends, and then allowing academic programs to be clear when it comes to their expectations, and to be provided to clinical instructors. They mentioned about, of course, training to clinical instructors to avoid burnout. They've mentioned some programs like CPI 3.0. There is also one great advice, like meeting where the students are and compare it how you treat patients. And then there's this statement about the new standard of CAPTE from 40 hours now to 32 hours for the 2024 standard. And they've mentioned about, what are the strategies that people are employing if some of the clinical instructors are just part-time and cannot complete 40-hour per week. And now it's 32 hours. So and also the March mailing from the Kentucky-Ohio Consortium that they have mentioned. Did I miss anything, Kelly?
I think the only other thing we discussed is maybe encouraging students to go out of their area a little bit more. So if one area had a lot of programs, to encourage them to go to other areas to spread them out a little bit.
Yeah. And then I think there's another one. The slots are from different clinical sites are unused by universities, and what are the ways on how we can make sure that those unused slots will be used by other universities and colleges?
Great.
That's all we have.
Yeah, thank you to both. If I could pass the reins to Jeanette for group 2.
Paul's actually going to report for us.
And there's
all right.
Paul.
Excellent. So in our group, we had a robust discussion. It was great. There was a lot of people speaking up, and ours was focused on variation in the placement process for students in clinical settings. And so there was expressed concern that some DCEs wanted to set up a system that was more granular in the placement of students and matching them with the right resources at the right time. In response to that, some other program DCEs said that they actually have students complete a interest inventory, then they subsequently meet with those students one-on-one for advising sessions. Some do it throughout the program at specified intervals. Others do it at the beginning, and others do it later. So there is some variance in terms of the meeting with students, but the goal is to get the students to the right place at the right time. One difficulty that was expressed was with integrated programs. And because their programs have the didactic aspect on the front end and their clinicals on the back end, perhaps, they're not as available for the first come, first serve placement opportunities. And so that makes it challenging for them, particularly if there's some clinical sites of interest the student may have or the school may have to want to place that student based on the student's needs. There was general agreement that there's increasing interest that sites are asking for interviews, pre-placement interviews. And one strategy that programs are doing, they're actually soliciting students' interest in particular specialty settings, and they're doing their own interviews on the academic side in advance and selecting a group of students and providing that group of students to the clinical site that then the site interviews. Interesting caveat, the choice that the site may select may not always be what the academic advisors thought would be the best candidate for their site. So, but nonetheless, it is a process that they're working through. In terms of specialty sites, there was a comment that they struggle with providing placements, general placements to students because of the trying to balance the student readiness in terms of their didactic knowledge and preparation, as well as with the clinical complexity, and not wanting the student to be placed into a setting and being unsuccessful. So it's a tough situation for some. Pediatrics has mentioned that there are not enough pediatric physical therapists, and yet the challenge in that setting is it is often very complex and difficult. So trying to find that balance of placements. There was great desire to see building relationships between clinical sites. Getting to know your clinical sites one-on-one helps with making those placements more productive and a better fit for both sides. So we had.
Great, thank you, Paul. And I think next group is group number 3, Carla.
Yes, we had Team Carla. We were great. Sad to say that. So we talked about new program development and the use of the regional consortia. And so we had a lot of representation, from all over the country: New York, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, New England, Ohio, Chicago. So everyone had some very interesting challenges. Had a couple of folks who are not connected to consortium and just wanted to get some ideas on how to engage. And so we discussed some strategies for starting a new consortium. For instance, we talked about, maybe you could invite yourself to another consortium and to observe, how that is, being run, what processes do they have in place, and then gathering that information and then inviting the programs around your area to have a discussion about how you can get things initiated, for the programs in your area. Some of the ideas that were shared were, how certain consortium are already structured, the bylaws, officers having clinical members, whether or not to have PTA members in the consortium, of course, dues, and how the benefit would be to share that workload, as far as teaching clinical instructors, for the CI credentialing course, offering continuing education content for, for your clinical instructors and programming, how all that can be shared, by all of the programs in the consortium. A lot of consortia have quarterly meetings, retreats, and then informal gatherings at ELC for dinner or lunch, something like that, so that you can have that human connection as well. So those are we talked about the benefits of that. Some other suggestions were standardization of some of the processes of regional consortia, since the consortia are doing so many things well, but differently. So how can you bring some of those things together? Also, then there's another suggestion about consider housing all the website information of all the consortia, on the C Commission page, if that's not done already. Bring the consortia together for roundtable discussions, discuss best practices, and consider organizing opportunities to educate clinical sites on becoming clinical sites of excellence and what that will look like for a quality clinical education experience. Or, we're as DCEs, we, are often, for lack of a better word, desperate to assign students to placements, but, it would be great if we can work within our consortia to try to create learning experiences or programming so that these clinical sites can become clinical sites of excellence. What do you have in place so that, you can provide a really great experience for students? And I think that's all we had, for our group. So that was group 3.
Wonderful.
Can I make one quick statement?
Of course.
Sure.
Just so everyone knows, there is a list on ACAP's website of all of the regional consortia and the leaders of those. We are working to get some updates to that. So we're working very hard with some of our communications to make sure that if there have been any recent changes, if you know of any recent changes that have not been updated, please reach out to us at clinicaleducation@acap.org, so that then we can make some of those changes to be live on that website.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeanette. Group number 4, Tara.
Yes, and I'll just note that over in the chat, I can see that Janice Howman has put that link in there for those regional consortia. So if you're interested in following up on that, the link is right over there. So we were discussing inpatient requirements, and I know we have just a few minutes left with regard to our conversation. So I will speak of some of the bigger points. We were fortunate enough to have Kelly King with us, who is a CAPD reviewer. So we had the opportunity to pick her brain a little bit about what CAPD requires, or just to revisit what some of us have known in terms of CAPD requirements for inpatient experiences, and that those aren't necessarily regarded only to acute care. There's a number of different ways that resource can be met, but that programs need to be able to clearly outline how they have met the competencies for or exposure for students for acute care, which was just part of our conversation that we were speaking of. We spoke a little bit about the motivation for clinical instructors to take some students. And in one setting, sometimes taking students at a 2-to-1 setting was actually for the more advanced clinical instructors, and was almost a point of pride in terms of particular sites where those clinical instructors were able to do that collaborative model. And then, the site itself is already educated on how that affects productivity. And so there was a lot of discussion about continued education with sites regarding productivity factors, and also speaking with, when we talked, we had a tangent touching on who isn't in the conversation. And sometimes administration is not in the conversation for some of these kinds of situations in order to talk about taking student placements. We did talk about the utilization of standardized patients in SIM and how those programs are proliferating within different schools, and how those might be able to meet the need for some of those acute care pieces, as well as the acute care confidence scales that can be utilized to work with students on that part. We did touch upon student resilience, which is a part of what's happening in acute care. Some of those inpatient settings, clinical instructors and SCCEs are seeing a lack of resilience, where students feel like they even haven't learned the material, or they weren't able to carry over the material, that has resulted in some failures in those settings, or having to regroup in those settings. So we spoke a little bit about how to address some of those potential student resilience issues, and touched quickly as we were leaving on student belonging in those kinds of settings. We did also have somebody from WashU who was there, who was able to give us a little bit about competency-based, their programming moving to competency-based education. So we talked a little bit about those entrustable activities that can be utilized in inpatient settings, or how programs might be able to do that on the front end. So that was just a very brief part of our conversation. There were suggestions for how to do a shorter term sort of acute care field trip that was done with one of the programs for PTAs, but to start some conversations with students to get early exposure in their ICE exposure to that setting. And also a discussion about the skilled nursing facilities and how they've not bounced back following COVID, and how it's been very difficult to place students into those settings, and how there might be some ideas to really address those situations, maybe partnering with those institutions that currently have low staffing, and in developing certain partnerships so that our students are rotating through, and then perhaps increasing their opportunities for employment. So I think there were a couple of other things also buried in there, but I think those were some of the more important points that we talked about, and how programs are progressing with those.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tara. That seems like a robust conversation for sure. In the interest of time, I'll quickly summarize the last group, which was meeting the student needs through accommodations. And what made me so excited in stepping into the breakout room was how diverse the room itself was. So we had people in all different professional roles. We had a student within our breakout session. We had an OT. It was great. She was there. It was wonderful. And she brought such insight to the conversation. So I think the diversity of the conversation was excellent. Specific to the content, I think there was a big kind of take-home message that not all accommodations or needs are the same, right? And it seems so simplistic, but meeting the student where they're at, having the student involved in the process of making sure that they're disclosing the necessary pieces to the necessary entities within their academic institution being critical, so that people can meet their needs as need be. Two was, again, kind of empowering the student in that decision-making process and involving them with their school resources. And then speaking of resources, it just seemed like there was a desire for, well, then what? Each clinical entity that we had within the conversation had different ways of best practice to manage different situations, but there seemed to be a drum of, wouldn't it be nice if we had a place to house some of these resources, or ways that people have tackled certain types of accommodation needs in different practice settings. So I'm excited for that conversation and where some of that can go, perhaps within some ACAP focus groups or things of that nature. So again, in the interest of time, what we are going to do is get your last thoughts out that you might have, place them into the chat board. We are going to save all that information and save the information from each of those breakout rooms as well. Our goal is we want to keep these lines of communications wide open. So expect future schedule for upcoming listening sessions, perhaps a varying design or style associated to it, but we're looking to do these quarterly to make sure that we have our ear down and we're hearing what's going on in the clinical education community. You saw it on all of the slides, clinicaleducation@acap.org. Don't be a stranger. If you have something to share, please do it with us. Feel free to also utilize the open forum within clinical education that's on the ACAP website. But make your voice be known. We are excited to be here, and hopefully we bump into a whole lot of you at CSM next week. Thank you guys very much for joining us and the time.